That is the first half of the argument for the state of Colorado, basically saying that they need to have authority over the electors. Let's bring in Seth Behrens-Weig, and Kelly Hyman also joins us now from Denver, Colorado. Kelly, to you first, since you're just joining us. Your take on what we've heard so far in Colorado versus Baca. What stood out to you, either from the justices' questioning or the argument you heard?
Yes, it was a really interesting argument that he made. I think that he made some really good points. That ultimately it's up to the state. That it's important to think about that every vote counts and every vote should matter. And so, if the elector is a free agent, they're basically not going with the popular vote. And I think that's important to remember, especially with the upcoming election, that a state should allow the people that whoever they want their president to let the voice of the people stand.
Seth, as we wait for the other side coming up next after the break here, what are you listening for? What are you going to be listening for, either from the justices or from the attorney arguing?
Well, one of the things that's always interesting in trying to read the tea leaves here is to really listen intently to the questions from the justices and try to get a little bit into their mindset as to which way they're leaning. And when you really look at it in terms of the first half of this argument, I would say that we've still got a long way to go here, but that Colorado's up against the ropes. I think that the justices, generally speaking, are somewhat skeptical of their position constitutionally. Justice Breyer was very interesting in being skeptical of the so-called bribery argument. And I think that really what he was trying to get to is to say, tell me when bribery was ever really an actual factor. And by the way, there's already laws that regulate bribery. And I also thought Justice Alito's argument about pointing out that states could always have better prior clarification of what the actual rules are as the electors come in versus just, kind of going and reaching out behind and bringing them back and pulling them back later was also a very interesting argument. So too early to tell, but I think that Colorado is a little bit up against the ropes right now. I'm sure other counsel will have their share of difficult questions as well, but a very interesting read as far as the first portion of the argument is concerned.
Yeah, and Kelly, at one point, Justice Kavanaugh said, why do we have the Electoral College, which is a question a lot of people have, is that, every year we've had a few times where the popular vote does not correspond to the president of the United States, the elected person, and that has, is part of this equation. Bottom line it for us, though, in your estimation, do you think that the problem is significant enough for the justices to side with the electors in that it hasn't made a difference, and it likely won't make a difference? You can make the argument, oh, well, if it's a super close election, that one elector in one state could, come on. The odds are way against that. Wouldn't it be safer for the justices to keep status quo?
That's a very interesting point. Ultimately, we're going to have to see, what they decide, whether the, states' rights prevail argument. But, we have to, what you said about the Electoral College, some would say that the founding fathers didn't trust the people, so that's why they had the electors. But there's been a big movement for people, for the popular vote to count, and I'm a strong advocate for that. I think we should get away with the Electoral College and let the people's vote count. Each vote should matter. Each vote should count.
Yeah, Seth, because now we don't trust the electors. We trust the people more.
Well, I concur. I think that when you have a situation where it's happened a couple of times in modern political history, that the popular vote is different than the electoral vote, and then you take a look at the arguments here, which are fascinating constitutional arguments. Justice Ginsburg's question about, does it really matter, not only cuts to the core of how it operates in this case, but the system overall. And some states are really starting to look at following the popular vote. So this case definitely matters and it's a big deal, but it also raises larger questions about how our democracy should be operating in a presidential election. And that's why it's so great when you have this unintended consequence of the door opening and the light coming in with everybody hearing this, that we're all getting a fascinating civics lesson on United States presidential elections.
Absolutely, and the court as well, for a lot of people listening in for the first time hearing these arguments. It's fascinating indeed. We're going to step aside, take a break. Joining me to discuss what we've heard today, Seth Berensweig is in the state of Virginia, a constitutional expert, and Kelly Hyman comes to us from Denver, Colorado. I want quick thoughts before we take a quick break here, just on what we heard here. Seth, to you first, what stood out with these arguments?
Well, I thought counsel for Baca did a very good job. I found him to be, frankly, a bit more persuasive and a little bit more agile and prepared for some of the intricacies that were set forth in the questions presented. The only thing that I think he missed an opportunity on was the question with respect to personal tangible harm. And I think that the only area that he missed was to point out that this isn't just a case about $1 for nominal damages. It's a case about deprivation of freedom of political speech and expression under the First Amendment. So I think that that was something that was a bit surprising. But overall, I thought that counsel did a very good job, and I think it'll be a close call.
Kelly.
I tend to agree that both counsels did an amazing job and really advocated their point, was very clear and concise. But some things I would have to disagree with. I thought that the Colorado was much more persuasive in the arguments, because if the fact that you are going to throw away the will of the people and let the elector decide whoever they want, then you're basically not counting people's vote. And I think that would do a severe harm to the people and also to the voters. But I think it's going to be very close. And ultimately, we're going to see what the Supreme Court decides to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Both sides basically predicting chaos if the justices go against them. We're going to take a break and discuss that and much more when we return. Welcome back to Court TV's continuing coverage of live arguments in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Joining me from Virginia, attorney Seth Berensweig, and in Denver, Colorado, attorney Kelly Hyman have been listening in with us this morning. Let's wrap up Baca versus Colorado and the Washington case, Chiafalo, Washington. Bottom line it for us here. This is all about politics, right? It's the political process, but yet ironically, it has nothing to do with a political party. When you look at the justices, you can't say, well, they're going to definitely come in because it's the right side or the left side. This is a different issue. It's about the process, and it would affect both sides moving forward. We don't know how it would affect the elections moving forward, if at all. So in keeping that in mind, Kelly, which way do you think this is going to go, and what would be the justification for either the right or the left of the court to side one way or the other?
Right. Well, one argument would be states' rights. So basically, you leave it up to the state to make the determination on what they feel if someone needs as electoral to make some kind of pledge, or basically saying that they are going to stick with the popular vote. So it's ultimately going to be the power of the people. Their vote is going to count or matter, or they're just going to have the electoral to do whatever they want to do. And so I think it's going to be a very close call on this one. And so we'll have to see what ultimately happens.
And Seth, it's individuals' rights as well.
Absolutely, individuals' rights as being teed up under, for example, the First Amendment for freedom of political expression. And, I think Justice Alito's question to the state as to why they couldn't just make it clear as to what the litmus test is, as opposed to just leaning up blankly on a power of appointment, was something that'll be very telling. But I think we agree that it's going to be a very close call. And it's also fascinating just to look in retrospect, just for 1 second, about the last 2 days of oral argument before the Supreme Court. Yesterday were the cases of Mazars and Vance against the president. That's something that has presidential political implications, things related to the election. Today we're talking about something that's also directly related to the presidential election. The Supreme Court tends to say that they're allergic to politics, but unfortunately for them, they're a little bit in the midst of it right now. So an important decision, and will be a close call.
Absolutely. All of the arguments have been fascinating over the last 2 weeks, 10 arguments in all. What about this process? The idea that, for decades, people have been knocking on the door, asking the Supreme Court for access, either audio, live audio, or even cameras in the courtroom during these arguments. How do you think it's gone? I mean, nobody got hurt here. It seemed to actually go very well. There was, yes, one flush of a toilet, but otherwise there weren't any technical issues, and the American people were able, if they wanted to, now to see and feel the process as it was happening. Kelly, do you think that this will make a difference moving forward? Is there a chance that this may be a small opening?
I hope so, because I really think it's important for access to the people to kind of hear this and kind of know what's going on, especially with, technology, whether they have, people there, how they're going to do it. So I'm hoping that it does open the door, because this is great to feel like you're there. And it's very exciting. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that this will change and that this will be some kind of process moving forward.
Seth, you're in D.C. Any chance here? At one point, Justice Breyer once told Roger Cossack, over my dead body, will there ever be a camera in the United States Supreme Court? Well, there are microphones there recording them now, and they just replay it on the Friday after arguments. Any chance we'll get live audio?
Well, I don't think that they're going to be opening their doors that much anytime soon, which is why I agree this has been such a very helpful public process. There's been so much activity and so much controversy regarding presidential issues and matters of constitutional concern, and people really go back and forth in social media. This is a unique historic opportunity for America to be able to open the doors and shed light in terms of what's happening with these issues that are so central and critical to our democracy. So I think it's fantastic, and I think that hopefully it's a trend that continues.
The bottom line here, though, Kelly, is that the justices have not want this historically. There's never been a real debate about it. It's just been people asking, and the absolutely no was the answer. So even though, let's fast forward post-coronavirus, they're back in chambers here. Is there even a process to get this open up? I mean, it seems to me like this door's gonna slam shut the way it was before, and 20 years from now, the argument is still gonna be within the confines of the courtroom.
Right. Well, I guess I'm always, optimistic. I always like to think of like this half full, so that maybe through this process that they realize that there is a way to do it, to give people more access, because I think it's really important that the American people hear this and they have the access to do this, and they deserve it. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that this will open up the eyes and maybe keep the door a little bit cracked for the possibility that it can happen moving forward.
All right, we're going to step aside, take a break. Welcome back to our coverage of the United States Supreme Court oral arguments being transmitted live for the first time in the court's history. Little update here. A woman awaiting the Supreme Court to rule on her case involving transgenders' rights has died. Amy Stevens was fired by a Michigan funeral home after she no longer wanted to be recognized as a man. She had her case argued before the High Court over the federal civil rights law protects whether or not it does a transgender person. Stevens' death was announced by the ACLU, which represented her in the lawsuit against the funeral home. Stevens was 59 years old. She suffered from kidney disease and was in hospice care. She was in a wheelchair. When the court heard her arguments last fall, a decision on this case is expected to be released next month. And Seth Berensweig and Kelly Hyman, a situation where, she's not going to be here to hear the court's final decision, but her name will be brought up in forever, in history, especially if the court decides in her favor. It is a case that a lot of people are watching and awaiting. Just your thoughts on this sort of phenomenon where, yes, she has died. She won't hear the decision, but boy, she absolutely made history, win or lose. Kelly.
Yes, no, absolutely. She is a true trailblazer, and we're so thankful for her doing that. It's a shame because of her health that she won't be there, but she'll be there in spirit to find out exactly what happens in this case. And so ultimately it boils down to whether this is discrimination. and whether she was discriminated or not because the way that she identified in gender. And it's interesting to note that a lot of states don't protect gender for employment discrimination. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that that will side in her favor, but ultimately we'll have to see what the Supreme Court decides to do in this case. But no matter what, she is a true trailblazer for what she's done.
Seth, quick final thoughts on the whole process over the last 2 weeks.
Well, let me just say that this breaking news regarding the passing of Amy Stevens is very sad. This issue of whether federal civil rights legislation encompasses transgender discrimination is a major historic question in the realm of employment law, and it's going to have a huge impact from coast to coast. But it's been a huge week, and it's been a huge week not only in terms of seeing where we go in terms of employment law and the scope of civil rights, but how the upcoming presidential election is also going to be impacted, as we've discussed today. So we'll see several decisions and history in the making as we see what happens over the next few months.
All right. Indeed, well said. Seth Kelly, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining us over the past 2 weeks. It has been a pleasure to bring you these historic arguments.